Hello, I'm Scott Anderson and I will be your narrator on this presentation, which is the first of a series of short films on the subject of Victorian art pottery. Victorian art pottery was essentially a phenomenon of the last 30 years of the 19th century, running up to the eve of the First World War, and was produced as a direct reaction to the ceramic production of the previous half-century. Production which, along with other contemporary design, William Morris, always associated, of course, with the arts and crafts movement, but also a man of the aesthetic movement, described as styleless anarchy. By the mid-19th century, England was enjoying all of the advantages of the Industrial Revolution. Improvements in the means of industrial production, better transport, meant that manufactured goods were available more cheaply and more plentifully than ever before. And British industry was growing wealthy, not only from the home market, but also from exporting goods to Europe and North America. One result of this industrially driven wealth was the emergence of a greatly enlarged and increasingly prosperous middle class, chiefly merchants and manufacturers. These people, newly wealthy, were eager to establish a cultural identity. They demanded more costly and ostentatious possessions in imitation of the wealthy landowning aristocracy of the 18th century. People who had been the focus of course, artistic patronage and cultural life in the Georgian period. However, unlike this latter group, these self-made Victorians often lacked the inherent taste of the cultured aristocracy of earlier times, and on the goods they admired, decoration was all too often mistaken for style. Ornament and novelty became replacements for quality. It was a trend which industrialization and declining standards of craftsmanship did nothing to alter. On the screen now is a vase of Rococo form made from around the 1820s through to, well, the middle of the 19th century. Rococo was a style that originally was brought about by designers in the mid-years of the previous century, so around the 1740s through to the 1760s, 1770s, but it enjoyed a revival in the early 19th century. And this Coalbrook Daleware vase is a typical example of the overwrought, badly designed Rococo revival styles of the mid-19th century. This was a type of ceramic design that the design reform movement wished to supplant with improved forms and decoration. They did not like what they saw with vase design like this. On objects such as pottery, such as that you see on the screen, ornament was lavish and overwrought, and expanding markets led to the indiscriminate production of ever-increasing quantities of singularly ill-designed and elaborate objects. Design motifs were selected at random from every age, and often motifs from several different historical periods or cultural areas of the world were represented on one object. It was 19th century eclecticism at its worst. For those designers who perceived this state of affairs to be undesirable, the problem was how to apply art to industrial products, how to replace mediocrity with taste. The connection between art and industry was to provide the subject for a continuing and crucial debate in Victorian society, and ceramic design was at the heart of this debate. Good design came to be associated with notions of good taste and fitness for purpose, functionality, I suppose. The newly emergent professional designer of the second half of the 19th century, formerly educated in a government school of design or the National Arts Training School in London, or trained in architecture possibly, held the responsibility for changing both public perception of design and encouraging manufacturers to accept new standards of quality and aesthetics. This dream, I suppose, was achieved through a variety of mechanisms and became a reality, certainly in some areas of design. Particularly important in bringing this about was the design reform movement led by Henry Cole, the man who is perhaps most associated in the public consciousness with the organisation of the Great Exhibition of 1851, and also with the setting up of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The design reform movement, led by Cole, abhorred bad design and the change of emphasis in the marketplace, which came about with the appearance of the English aesthetic movement of the 1870s and 1880s, and then continued on to the end of the century, really made a change. On the screen now, we can see another one of these Neo-Rococo pieces of China. It's a Minton potpourri and stand in bone china. Around about 1830, this would have been produced. Again, it's very like the Coalbrookdale vase you've just seen in its extravagance of moulded applied decoration and, of course, painted decoration as well. You see pieces like this, you can often see things like paintings depicting castles or mountains, or as you have it here, a mill. They usually bear very little relation to the function of the pot that they decorate. One of the main reasons for this unhealthy state of British design in the 19th century was, as we've said, the Rococo revival, which began in the 1820s and lasted well beyond the middle of the century. It brought about a vogue for overly ostentatious, naturalistic ornament, particularly in the fields of metalwork, ceramics, and even heavily carved furniture. The trend was especially noticeable at the Great Exhibition of 1851 and brought criticism from designers concerned to promote concepts of taste and the use of appropriate ornament for industrial produced goods. As we've mentioned, one of the earliest of these design reformers was Henry Cole. In 1847, Cole founded Felix Summerley's Art Manufactures. This was a design company dedicated to, and I quote, the good old practice of connecting art with familiar objects in daily use, end of quote. The company, in trying to push forward these ideas, commissioned a series of designs from artists sympathetic to Cole's views. Artists such as Richard Redgrave, usually better known for painting, as was Daniel Maclise, another associate of Cole's. And these artists produced various designs for Cole with the express purpose of providing forms and decoration which were suitable for their function. On the screen now we have a glass vessel which is designed to hold water. It would have come with a beaker which would have been inverted over the top, the mouth of the carafe, and left by your bedside, so that if you woke up in the night and you felt thirsty, you could just reach for your glass and fill it with nice cool water from your carafe. The Wellspring carafe of 1847 was a vessel designed by Richard Redgrave to conform to the ideals of the design reform movement. It was commissioned by Henry Cole for his Felix Summerley's Art Manufacturers. It was registered in 1847 and made, as it shows you on the slide, by the company of J.F. Christie of Lambeth, London being a very large glass manufacturing area of the time. The thing to look at with this particular piece of design is the clear and clean lines. There are no extraneous handles. You didn't need a handle. You lifted it by the neck of the vessel and poured your water directly into a beaker so that you could drink it. Perhaps more noticeable, however, are the water reeds that are hand painted on the outside of the vessel. Fired, of course, they won't wash off if you get the water onto them. But this is a good example of the ideals of the design reform movement. It is effectively appropriate decoration for a vessel containing water. And it was this sort of idea, rather than painting a vase for water and flowers with a castle or an agricultural scene on it, that was to change the design of the day. On the screen now, we have a ceramic version of Wellspring. These designs were often carried over into a variety of materials, sometimes metalwork, sometimes ceramics. So this ceramic version of Wellspring, produced by the design reform movement, follows their concepts of design, their ideals, and was manufactured by the potteries firm of Minton. It is very noticeable, though, that for a vase which probably would have held flowers, and those flowers would have been in water, that the decoration should be appropriately things like water reeds, various water plants that match, as it were, the whole idea of water in the container. Another important influence on design, and one which followed the direction set up by the architect-designer Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin, and also continued by the Victorian designer Christopher Dresser, is a tendency towards flatness and form and greater stylization of motifs. And this was in many respects down to the publication of a book, The Grammar of Ornament, written and produced by Owen Jones in 1856. This became a textbook for designers for the next 50 years or more. In this work, which also included drawings by Christopher Dresser, Jones himself presented 37 propositions which he related to the use of form and colour in architecture and the decorative arts. Important in the context of this discourse is Proposition 8, which states that, and I quote, "all ornament should be based upon a geometrical construction," end of quote, which is reinforced by Proposition 13, open quotation, "flowers or other natural objects should not be used as ornaments, but conventional representations founded upon them sufficiently suggestive to convey the intended image to the mind, without destroying the unity of the object they are employed to decorate," end of quote. So you don't model rather delicate flowers and apply them to the outside of a pot. You don't have subject matter in painted panels that is not relevant to the vessel upon which it is painted. Now, this whole idea of form, function, and appropriate decoration was the antithesis of John Ruskin's propositions concerning truth to nature as the basis for all illustrative work. Ruskin was a very religious man, and he felt that if you were going to paint something, a flower or a leaf, it should be done very naturalistically, as God had created. And if you painted it, you should do your best to produce an accurate version. But the design reformers appear to have overwhelmed any support that Ruskin may have had in this field of design. Considerations of the divine in nature disappeared, rendered very much subservient to the considerations of expediency, of design and manufacture. In the area of art pottery, flower-encrusted vases were not a noticeable product line. Jones's grammar became the reference work, as we have mentioned, for generations of designers. Not only did it contain numerous European historical styles, mostly in full colour, but it also introduced a variety of Oriental and Far Eastern styles of ornament. These proved equally popular as the basis of design work and set the scene for the wave of Japonism that was to prove so popular a source of inspiration for British designers from the 1860s onwards. And on the screen you can see one of these designers, Christopher Dresser. In producing his grammar of ornament, Jones was fulfilling another role that became part of the designer's lot in the 19th century, that of introducing new, usually foreign, stimuli to British manufacturers. Dresser followed Jones in this tradition. He actually was one of the first designers to visit Japan. Essentially, design became a matter of creating form and ornament. It was markedly eclectic in nature, and as such always appeared to look modern, very topical. Against this background, the designer came to represent the cultural interface between art and industry. For British design, I suppose, it was a dream come true. Dresser, who was the most successful at unifying the aims of art and industry, saw himself in these terms. On business cards that he was using in the 1870s, he styled himself not as an artist, but as architect and ornamentalist. Between them, Pugin, Cole, Jones, Dresser, and others had succeeded in creating a new professional persona for the designer, who could be an architect or a fine artist, but frequently was neither, not necessarily one or the other. Dresser, for one, styled himself as an architect, but had no training really in the constructional side of the subject, and would have been better termed as an interior decorator. Their achievements provided an opportunity for a whole new group of artists who favoured the decorative arts, artists who were to find a new career as designers, more interested in pattern than painting. William Morris was one such designer, and a lesser-known man, William James Neatby, who worked a great deal in ceramics, was another. The improved status of the designer attracted numerous individuals to try their hand at designing things like wallpapers, furniture, or metalwork, and of course ceramics. So successful did they become that in 1891, that great wit and playwright and poet Oscar Wilde was able to comment somewhat sarcastically perhaps, and I open quotes, "All over England there is a renaissance of the decorative arts. Ugliness has had its day. Even in the houses of the rich there is taste, and the houses of those who are not rich have become more gracious and comely and sweet to live in." End of quote. Obviously, Oscar Wilde was impressed in his own inimitable way. Victorian art pottery was just one of the various areas in the period of the aesthetic movement that provided an important contribution to this achievement commented upon by Wilde. The increasing demands of manufacturers in the late 19th century encouraged a move towards greater versatility and wider experience in the fin de siècle artistic community. The improvement of a whole range of consumer products became the concern of the artistic designer, who was required to apply his or her talents universally. In contrast to those working in narrow areas of science or technology, the late Victorian designer found specialization a disadvantage, and those individuals who achieved success, like the famous illustrator and interior designer Walter Crane, who undertook almost any task from book illustration to, as we've said, interior decoration, had to be able to design for almost any function, and of course, depending upon the job, in a variety of media. In design, the only limit on the imagination was taste. It sounds good. It sounds even easy, and obviously very logical, but designers still had to satisfy the demands of the marketplace. How do you convince people to go for these new designs when a Rococo revival had been so popular? In the 1870s and 1880s, that proved relatively easy, for England at that time was in the throes of what was an unprecedented wave of interest in the arts. This was the period of the English aesthetic movement, a time of which it has been said that, and you can see the quote on the screen, there has assuredly never been, since the world began, an age in which people thought, talked, wrote, and spent such inordinate sums of money and hours of time in cultivating and indulging their tastes. It was all about shopping, I suppose. And here we can see the interior of the London showrooms of the Burmantofts Pottery Works in Charterhouse Street, which was a street in London where there were a number of ceramics shops and other shops selling artistic products. And you can see there this wonderful tiled interior. Burmantofts made tiles as well as pots. You can see in this interior there is a gentleman, presumably with aesthetic taste, being shown a series of beautiful pots. Perhaps he will choose one for his home. I hope his wife will be pleased with it. This was the age of the aesthetic man and often woman. Many women were very much involved with the aesthetic movement. And of course, particularly when it came into interior design, women liked to create their own beautiful homes. And many men did as well. These were people who believed in beauty for its own sake, and saw that beauty and simplicity, and not in overall ornamentation of the preceding half century, was the way to go. Staying with the subject of the Burmantofts Art Pottery Company of Leeds, just outside Leeds, in the late 19th century, very large ceramics works. We have here a page taken from a trade catalogue of the 1880s that was actually issued by the Burmantofts Pottery Company. This page is quite interesting. It's one of a number of catalogues that survive from the period, and it illustrates a range of art pottery products, including tiles, vases, and even on the extreme left-hand side, you can just about make out a ceramic table. This was a ceramic art produced on a large scale for the aesthetic consumers, which they catered for at the time. And you can see there some of those shapes are rather ornate, but many of them quite simple. Very popular with collectors today are things like the dragon vase that you see on the left-hand side. And tiles, of course, are eagerly collected as well by many people who follow Burmantofts. In their desire for new designs with clean outlines and simple forms, these aesthetes were influenced by the multitude of different Japanese arts and crafts goods which appeared in Britain from the early 1860s onwards, and many art pottery forms incorporate Eastern ideas, often specifically Japanese ideas, in their design. However, the aesthetes were also attracted by the romantic appeal of the medieval period, as expounded by William Morris and John Ruskin, that which was given visual form in the paintings of the pre-Raphaelites, with all their beautiful medieval scenes. This was another version of beauty, but one which the aesthetes were enthusiastic to possess in the goods that they bought. Other than paintings, they wanted to see this same sort of aesthetic exposition on things like glassware, particularly on ceramics, but also on painted furniture. New French ideas in the field of ceramic decoration were also well received. And so popular did painted pottery, often in the French style, become that many aesthetes embarked on amateur china painting. In effect, there were several different inspirational themes behind art pottery of the Victorian period, and this is reflected in the rich diversity of ceramic products. On the screen at the moment is a print showing the next big exhibition. Going back to this period in the 19th century, people started to produce big exhibitions, big national exhibitions or international exhibitions, about every 11 years or so. And so 1851, 11 years later, it was 1862, we have another international exhibition in London. Here it is. The catalyst that produced the cohesive force that can be categorized as the English aesthetic movement was the 1862 International Exhibition in London. After more than 2 centuries of self-imposed isolation from the rest of the world, Japan had been opened up in the mid-1850s. Contact with many of the nations in the rest of the world was re-established. Trade was re-established, and the London exhibition of 1862 witnessed a display for the first time in England of large quantities of Japanese decorative art subjects. The material on show was alien to anything seen before and was eagerly appreciated by progressive artists and designers of the day. Japanese metalwork, fans, and prints became highly fashionable and began to influence Western fine and decorative arts. Foremost among the results of this Japonism was the fashion for collecting ceramics. Initially blue and white oriental wares, but gradually widening to include a whole variety of other ceramic forms. By the 1870s, this collecting had become a China mania, and the market for artistic ceramics had become so great that English designers and manufacturers began to look seriously at the economic potential of this new type of pottery. On the screen at the moment is another view, this time of the interior of the 1862 International Exhibition, showing you some of the exhibits. And well, as it asks you to do, note the interest in ceramics as evidenced by the various items in the background of this Baxter print. And in particular, if you look between the statues, the sculpture, you can see a whole range of ceramic items. Moving on from the last slide, we go from the general to the particular, and perhaps the stand that exhibited some of the most interesting objects of the exhibition, particularly interesting for artists and designers. This was the first real exhibition of, on a large scale, of Japanese products at a Western exhibition. It was very much tailored to the British taste. It was meant to be appealing to the British taste, not just to show what Japan was about, but to actually result in getting sales of Japanese objects to the all-consuming public of the day. The reason for this was that all the exhibits had been collected by Sir John Rutherford Alcock. In 1858, he was made Britain's consul general in Japan. And when he came back to Britain in 1862, he had brought all this stuff with him, I think with the express intent to exhibit and obviously to have the thing successful in terms of selling these objects. And indeed, many of them did sell at the exhibition. The Japanese stand at the 1862 International Exhibition probably had more impact on visitors than many of the other stands because of the arrival in Britain of the first Japanese government delegation. And this delegation toured the country and, of course, visited the show. And they were dressed, of course, as you would expect, in their exotic Japanese costumes. And these costumes, as worn by the delegation, had never really been seen by the British public before. Wherever you were in the country, because the delegation toured Britain, there would have been newspaper reports on these particular delegates from Japan, and local stories, national stories. It seems that many people with an interest in culture beyond our own were interested in this visitation, and it just gave that added little bit of frisson to the exhibition at the London show itself. Really quite a wonderful ad, as it were, for the exhibition. Now, the English were not the only Europeans to be inspired by Japanese art design and the other eclectic influences of the period. A comparable experience, in artistic terms, to England's experience in 1862 occurred in Paris at an international exhibition held in 1867. And following on from this, new French ideas in the field of ceramic decoration were also well received in England, and so popular did painted pottery become that many aesthetes, as I think we've mentioned earlier, embarked on amateur china painting. With the vogue for collecting Oriental wares soon joined by a similar enthusiasm for acquiring the new European styles, by the 1870s the country was very much in the throes of China mania. To end the presentation, and we haven't seen that much Victorian art pottery, but this is just an introduction to set the scene. We have an image of two early Burmantofts pottery shapes. Now, although Japonism first manifested itself in the works of progressive painters such as James Abbott McNeill Whistler, you'll have heard, I'm sure, of the painting Whistler's Mother, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the famous Pre-Raphaelite, and the collecting of Oriental blue and white ceramics, fans, prints, and other decorative arts objects. By the 1870s, English manufacturers were producing their own Anglo-Japanese style wares, such as these two vases produced in Leeds around about 1881. Now, these two vases are only quite small, I think the smallest one's only about 3 inches and the larger one about 4.5, 5 inches. They're very small indeed. They are earthenware pottery, lovely shiny glaze on them, quite beautiful. And they're really where this story starts, both for the rest of this series, but particularly personally for me. About 40 years ago, I walked into an antiques fair in Hinckley in Leicestershire, and I saw on one of the stalls at the antiques fair these two, which I thought were rather beautiful little vases. No idea what they were. I picked them up. They had a very strange monogram on the bottom, a sort of reverse B and an F. They both had it, and they both had a shape number on them. The shape number quite low, so I can tell from that they were nice and early, amongst other things. But I really didn't have a clue what they were. I didn't know where they were made. I didn't know how much they were going to be, so I looked at the label. Oh, I thought this is quite nice. I could afford these. Each of the vases had a price ticket for £5.50 on them. And I thought, £11, not too bad. But I thought perhaps we can get them a little cheaper. So I talked to the stall holder, who told me a little bit about them. She said they were in the Japanese taste, but that they were made in England by a firm which described itself as Burmantofts Faience, a firm which had made art pottery, like Victorian art pottery, in the 1880s, 1890s, and through to the beginning of the 20th century. She was so interested, I think, looking back, that she was willing to smile upon my enthusiasm. And I got the pair of them for £9, so I didn't do too badly. And from that day onwards, I've always enjoyed looking at Victorian art pottery. I've researched it. I've sometimes sold it when I got bored with a piece. And I've had quite a lot of pieces go through my hands from time to time over the following 40 years. Now, we've mentioned Burmantofts several times, and as we go through the series of films, there will be a week's look, or there'll be a series look, specifically at Burmantofts wares. However, we're going to have a look, or we're going to investigate a number of art potteries. We'll look at painted pottery, we'll look at some stonewares, and we'll also have a look at the work of William de Morgan, a great friend of William Morris, who produced pottery that William Morris sold in his shop, along with de Morgan tiles. But there will be a lot of more affordable examples that we can have a look at, so that everyone feels that they can enjoy not just the presentation, but perhaps collecting various examples of art pottery. Whether you can afford £4.50 for a little vase, and I think now you could probably say that these are more like £30 to £40 a piece, these vases, in a modern money. But whether you could start off with this and work your way up, or whether you'd like to start at the top and work your way down, well, over the next few weeks, months, we'll be having a look at a variety of different art potteries, and we'll look at marking and dating as well, so there should be something for everybody. So with this picture, I will leave you. Please keep an eye on my YouTube site. Please subscribe to my videos. Not much on there at the moment, but there will be over the next few weeks and months, particularly with this series. So keep an eye out, and hopefully you will become as enthusiastic as Victorian art pottery as I am. Thank you very much.